Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast. As always, thank you so much for joining us today as we are about to dive in and talk about a recent trip we took to Panama.
Yeah, we're really excited because we have been back traveling over the last couple of weeks, and it's been really fun to be back on the road and exploring some places that we've been before, that we haven't been for a long time. And we're really excited to dive into our most recent trip to Panama City, Panama.
Yeah, and anyone who's been listening to the show will know that we spent a decent amount of time in the past in Panama. I know we have at least one episode talking about Panama-related things, probably a couple, hey?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly how many episodes, but I know there's for sure one. I think that there are a couple on Panama because we did quite a bit of things while we were there as well.
Yeah, and so we got interested in Panama as a potential place to live, and in the fall of 2019, went down there. We signed a year-long lease on an apartment, started to get life set up there, kind of using it as a base to travel and exploring Panama from Panama City. I really loved it, and then the world kind of went crazy at the start of 2020. And in March of 2020, we kind of abruptly packed up and left. And so it felt really like an incomplete loop, trip, lots of stuff we wanted to do that never got done. And so this year, or I guess towards the end of last year, we were looking at the trips we wanted to take now that we're getting back to traveling more. And we found really affordable flights from Mexico to Colombia via Panama. And Copa and Panama have a cool thing they're doing now where you can just add days of a stopover and not have to pay like the extra taxes, kind of like Iceland did in the past. And so on our flight, we were able to choose like 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, how long you want to stay in Panama for. And so we took that opportunity to go have a 3-day trip there. And so in this episode, we want to talk about kind of the background for that, what we did, why we think stopping over in Panama could be something cool to do if you're headed somewhere like Brazil or other parts of South America that Copa fly, and what we'd recommend doing if you were there only for a couple of days. And then also give a little bit of a life update and talk about what it's been like traveling with our soon-to-be and now 1-year-old daughter.
Yeah, for sure. So where should we start?
Yeah, so I gave a bit of the background detail on Panama, but maybe just a little bit about like the background on Panama City.
Yeah, for sure. So Panama City is the capital of the country of Panama. Panama is in Central America, but it's right on the border of South America. So it's like as soon as you go over to Colombia, which is the country that borders it to the south, you are technically in South America. And when you cross north, you're in Central America. And one of the things I think about Central America that's really interesting is that people will often tell you, don't go to the capital cities or fly in, immediately get a taxi, leave. This is what we found when we went to Guatemala. It was like, don't spend any time in Guatemala City, immediately leave. You know, you fly in and basically you get your car, your transport, your taxi out. And I feel like Panama City is a really unique city within Central America because it is like a major metropolitan city. It's super developed. It's very beautiful. There's a lot going on there. Panama as a nation is pretty small. I think the population is around 4 million people, and pretty close to half of that population live in Panama City. So it's a big city, but it's not a huge city. Like when you compare it to cities like Mexico City or Buenos Aires, or Rio de Janeiro or something like that. And like Ryan said, there's a ton of flight opportunities. It's a huge, huge hub for people basically going from North America to South America and South America to North America. So there's probably a ton of people listening, or you probably know somebody who's had a layover in the Panama City airport. And I think it's really cool what Copa Airlines is doing right now because they're really encouraging people to leave the airport, to spend a couple days to explore. And so when we decided that we wanted to go spend a month in Colombia, we were looking at the different flight options, and there are airlines, I think Aeromexico is one of them, that flies direct from Mexico City to Medellin. But then we saw that Copa for a really good rate was stopping over in Panama City, and we decided, hey, we haven't been there for almost 3 years. So we went the beginning of January 2023. We left March 2020, like Ryan said. And like Ryan said, we left in a real rush. We basically didn't know we were leaving up until like 3, 4, 5 days before we booked our flight. We left an apartment that we had set up. We left our, 1 liter of Frank's Red hot sauce that we'd bought from the Costco. We just up and left, and we kind of assumed, okay, we'll come back. And obviously we never did. So life is very different now. And it just feels like it felt like a good time to go back and a great opportunity because the flights we found were super, super affordable with this amazing, 3-day layover included.
Yeah. And so Panama City, like you said, big developed city, definitely worth a visit, and definitely isn't one of those places where you should just show up and leave. Really strong. I think people get Miami vibes to it. It's on the Pacific Ocean. Obviously the Panama Canal is super famous, and that's very close to the city. But tons of cool stuff to see and do. Lots of great food, beautiful weather, and the airport's pretty close to the city. I think it's about 30 minutes driving, depending on traffic. And so want to talk a little bit about what we did on our 3 days there, what some of our other favorite things from Panama City are. So if you're someone who's going to go stay over for a few days, what we'd recommend you do that maybe we didn't do. And so the first part, kind of where in the city to stay, where did we stay? When we were living there, we were living in a neighborhood called San Francisco, which we really liked. A lot of people talk about El Cangrejo, as a place to live. We didn't love it so much. Really liked San Francisco. We were right by a park, really nice apartment. There's lots of cool restaurants around. But if you're going to stay, I think the best bet is to find somewhere to stay in Casco Viejo. It's the old town in Panama. Beautiful old part of the city. You're right on the ocean. And there's a ton of cool restaurants, cafes, bars, and lots of good accommodations. So there's lots of Airbnbs and also some really beautiful hotels around.
Yeah, I think if you're just looking for a couple of days, you might be looking on something like Expedia or Booking or Airbnb, and you're going to kind of see clumps of options show up. I think if you're more looking for hotels, they're going to show up in kind of like Avenida Balboa, which is a lot of the really big towers. A lot of the big famous names will be there. That's actually where we stayed the very first time we went to Panama, which was back in 2018. And I remember thinking that I didn't really get the hype at that point. It felt like, we'd leave the hotel and there wasn't a lot of cool restaurants around. It was very we were just in a kind of major downtown area with a lot of buildings. And then when we went back, we stayed at an Airbnb in El Cangrejo, like Ryan said, wasn't our favorite area. But then we found our apartment that we loved in San Francisco, and we spent a lot of time in Casco Viejo, which is the old town, because we were doing Spanish lessons there. And so this time going around, it felt kind of like a no-brainer since we'd explored a bunch of areas that this is where we want to stay. This is where the restaurants we like are. It's got quick walking to the Cinta Costera, which we'll talk about in a little bit, where we know we want to go for a walk. We knew that it would be very easy because we wouldn't have to take a lot of Ubers and stuff with the baby, which we'll also talk about in a little bit. But I would just say that that's kind of the cutest area that has the most I think Caribbean, Panamanian vibes. And so if you are spending that little layover there, definitely look for a boutique hotel or an Airbnb in that area.
Yeah, and definitely the most touristic part of the city, but it doesn't there's still lots Panamanians there, people who are just, coming to check it out for the day. It doesn't feel hey, this is a, TV set, or this is just a cruise ship walk-through gift shop place. Especially because some great cafes, some great food, and some cool museums and things to check out. And it's just a great base in general. I think obviously the most famous thing about Panama is the Panama Canal. And so if you're going for a couple of days, you definitely want to get over there and check it out. There's tons of different tours you can do. You can actually do boat tours where you go up and go down if you're there and you're timing it right. When we've gone, and kind of the thing we've recommended to other people is just getting an Uber, going out to the visitor center there. You can go kind of walk around. There's a cool museum. They play some themed movies. And then also you can just sit there and watch the boats go through, which at a typical time you'll see maybe a cruise ship go through, which is really fun to do and to see.
Yeah, and so there's a couple different like visitor centers that you can go to, but the one that's closest that we've been to is called Miraflores. So that's the one that would be a pretty quick little taxi or Uber ride, especially if you were staying in Casco Viejo. It's not too far from there. So that wasn't something that we did on this trip because we've done it a couple of different times. We've been there a number of times, and so for the trip that we were on, that didn't feel like the most essential thing for us to do. And so maybe let's talk a little bit about what we did on our trip in the couple days that we had.
Yeah, so for our trip, we arrived on a Thursday evening. It was just enough time to go out to get dinner. We'd found a really nice Airbnb that we were excited about, kind of just being at in general. So it was more than just a bedroom. So we did dinner, came back, hung out. And then on Friday, I was working for a good chunk of the day. So we were kind of basing ourselves mostly pretty close to home. But we were able to get out for 3 great meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and do a nice walk. One of the things I think both of our top of our list to do is that kind of starting in Casco Viejo and running down Avenida Balboa is the Cinta Costera, which is a beautiful walking path, also a biking path that goes truly a very, very long way. Kind of want to avoid it in the heat of the day, but great at sunset, great at the start of the day. A beautiful place to walk and kind of see the boats and see the buildings. So that is really cool. And then kind of Saturday was our big full day. So we had a chance to meet up with a friend, someone who you've heard on this podcast before, David from Casco Antigua Spanish, which is the Spanish school we were going to and really loved in Panama City. And then what else did we do on the Saturday?
I think we also did like breakfast, coffee, met up with David for another coffee. Obviously, and we can talk about this in a little bit, we had to coordinate around Lou's nap time. So I think by the time we were kind of done with coffee and naps, we went for a little walk and then we grabbed some dinner, and that was pretty much it. And then we flew out early on Sunday morning. So we pretty much were just like eating, walking around, kind of exploring that neighborhood, catching up with a friend. And I feel like for us, it was kind of just a trip about like seeing what the vibe was like, you know, post-pandemic, getting back there, just enjoying what Panama City has to offer, because we've done a lot of the kind of major touristy things. I feel like we didn't really, you know, do a lot.
No, yeah, and I think one of the big learnings, which we'll dive a little bit into for us, was I think we had a few other things planned. Like we were like, oh, maybe we could go walk the causeway. Maybe we could go back to Parque Omar, which is near where we were living. But just kind of realizing that going too far from where you're at when you have kind of these relatively short wake windows between times that the baby needs to be napping makes it a little bit challenging.
Yeah, for sure. And we can definitely talk more about that in a little bit. But one thing I think is worth mentioning is that Casco Viejo is on the like southwest part of Panama City. So the airport is more east of the city. So it's a little bit of a trek to get from the airport to Casco Viejo, especially during traffic. So when we arrived, for example, it was about an hour from the airport to the door of our Airbnb. And if you're ever trying to go anywhere, you know, first thing in the morning or in the evenings, kind of right around rush hour, it can be a little bit hectic getting Ubers, getting places, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's one thing that just needs to kind of go into like the planning and stuff. And one of the reasons, you know, on top of having the baby, coordinating her schedule, you were working one of the days, is I think we kind of got to the Saturday afternoon and it was pretty late in the afternoon. And we kind of thought, okay, we could go over to where we used to live, check out our old building. We could go for a walk in the park, but it's going to be a good, 30 minutes in an Uber and maybe worse getting back with traffic. And I think we just opted out to doing that much time in the car, both for us and for the baby, and let's just go to a rooftop and get a drink and enjoy the sunset and then, have a nice leisurely dinner. We don't have to rush around doing a bunch of things, which I'm really happy that we did do because we had a lot of travel kind of on either side of this trip, and it was nice to just kind of relax and enjoy.
Yeah, and so for us on our trip, a lot of hanging out in Casco Viejo, a walk on the Cinta Costera. There's some beautiful restaurants and properties and hotels, some really cool cafes. Like the American Trade Hotel has a cafe in it, which is really nice. There's a really nice restaurant in the new Sofitel, which is right on the coast. So those are really cool to check out as well. Lots of fun activities you can do and like bar nights. I know the Selena in Casco Viejo has some cool stuff going on if you're kind of single or traveling as a couple. And then what would you say kind of if you were just talking to someone who's going for 48 hours, for 72 hours on a stopover, who hasn't been to Panama, like what would be the things you'd add that we didn't do, but would be worth adding in and checking out?
Yeah, I think we've kind of mentioned a good chunk of it. But so I would say you arrive, you get from the airport to where you're staying. Like you said before, I would suggest staying in Casco Viejo just because that's going to probably have the best vibe. Grab some dinner there. There's a lot of really good places. I think we've got a whole blog post on restaurants to eat at, but some of our favorites that we ate at this time, Nomada is great. I think there's a Mexican restaurant in the Selena. If it's still there, we didn't go this time, but taco place. Tantalo is great. They have a great rooftop, great food. That was one of the things we did. Went up to the rooftop, watched the sunset, had a drink, went down, ate dinner kind of in their main restaurant. That's a hotel as well, so that might be a great place to stay also. And then La Fonda Loquei or Fonda Loquei is one of the apparently top restaurants in all of Latin America. I had no idea that was a place that was just recommended to us that we ate at when we were there last time. We loved it. We had plans of going back, and then, a lot of plans didn't happen just because we ended up leaving quite quickly. We got coffee at Cafe Unido both days that we were there. That's definitely our favorite cafe, but like Ryan said, the American Trade Hotel has a great cafe also. Unfortunately, a couple places that we really like did close down, which we'll talk about how things have kind of changed and just observations from, since pandemic days. But I would say definitely give yourself some time to eat because there's some great, great food. One experience that I really love is walking from Casco Viejo to the fish market. I think it's about like a 25 minute walk. You can walk over there for lunch or dinner, and there's a ton of restaurants there, and you can get some really traditional Panamanian food there, super fresh fish. We used to go either for dinner or for lunch, have a walk on the Cinta Costera, go order like a whole fried fish, get some fried plantains, some rice, a couple of drinks, and then, continue on our walk. So I think that's a really cool experience to have. And then, like you said, going to the canal, if you've never been, I think is something really great to do. I think if you've done any of that stuff before, like maybe if you've been and you're going for a second time, a couple other things that I like would be going up Ancon Hill. So that's right accessible from Casco Viejo. You can walk. It's like a little mirador. It gets pretty hot and sweaty in the Panamanian heat. It is hot, hot, hot in Panama and very humid, so you will get sweaty. So prepare for that. But the view from the top is really beautiful. You can see, the coastline where the city is, and then you can also see some of the other sides and whatnot where there's like, more jungle and nature and stuff going on. And then one other thing that we kind of mentioned is the causeway. So walking out on the causeway can be really cool. There's some restaurants at the end. There's a museum there. So I really love a walk on the causeway. And I think if we'd had a bit more time, going up Ancon Hill and walking on the causeway would have been two things that I would have loved to do.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect list. And I think, it was fun for us, and we'll talk more about this in a second, but as we got used to traveling with Lou, but I think if it was just the two of us, we probably would have got out to the causeway, maybe for like a sunset, stroll out there, and then, maybe done something a little bit more like hiking like Ancon Hill. One other thing I guess I'll throw in there is Panama Vieja, if you're a history buff. That was pretty cool and relatively in the city. It's like the old city of Panama. And then, if you're kind of staying in Panama for a longer time or kind of considering like, hey, I'm going to go check Panama out to see if I want to learn more about it. We've got some other content on Panama, some past episodes. I'm pretty sure we wrote at least one blog post about restaurants and different stuff we liked. But definitely go and check that out.
Yeah, I know for sure that we've got a list of restaurants and a list of things to do. So that has some more comprehensive stuff. So we can make sure there's links for that in the show notes if you guys want to check it out. But hopefully that gives some context in what we did, what we kind of like to do there, as well as some other recommendations if maybe you're going to fly with Copa Airlines and do a little stopover. And I would definitely, like I said before, recommend checking that out because we found that the flights were super affordable to do that. And like Ryan mentioned at the beginning, you don't get the extra like tourist taxes and stuff. So definitely really good pros to that. And I don't think there's a lot of cons, and it lets you explore a potentially new city, which is great.
Yeah, and one thing I'll know, I think you don't really see it if you go through Skyscanner. You need to go through Copa Direct. So if you're flying to like Medellin, somewhere in Brazil, I think they fly to most, like probably Argentina, like most South American countries, maybe worth just like a second glance. This episode's not sponsored by Copa, although that would be lovely if that was the case. Just like something we were really excited about. And so kind of passing along our recommendation.
Yeah, for sure. If anyone out there has a connection at Copa, hit us up. Jokes, kind of. But yeah, if you just go to Copa's website, it's really easy to see the like book a layover or whatever. They've got a big button for it. It seems like they're pushing it pretty hard. And so before we dive into just, how travel has kind of shifted with having Lou and whatnot, I wanted to talk a little bit about just like what Panama is like 3 years later, what it was like going back, how we felt, any observations we made about how things are different. Obviously a lot of stuff has happened in the world over the last couple of years with the pandemic. And, I think there's changes within countries and within cities just in general over that time period. But I feel like just with the pandemic happening, everything feels so drastic and dramatic. So what are your thoughts? What was it like being back in Panama?
Yeah, definitely fun. Definitely loved being back there. We were kind of joking about like our move back to Panama meter. And kind of as we went, I think we both got back and it's like beautiful and warm. It'd been quite cold here in Querétaro. The air quality is great. And so we were loving it. A couple heavy rainstorms kind of made us tweak our meter down a little bit, but had a really great time and loved being back. Still feel like for me, like there's so much stuff I want to do there. And it's a country I think that does fly a little bit under the radar. Obviously people know about the canal, but when you see how many people go to Costa Rica, so much of that stuff is kind of similar to what you could get in Panama. So there's that. Definitely seems like just the general vibe after a couple of days, so totally unscientific, seems to be doing really well. Like there's people all over the place. I know they just built a big cruise terminal, so I think that contributes as well. But one of the kind of smaller things we've noticed is kind of when we were there, we were both in a Canadians in Panama Facebook group and a Young Expats in Panama Facebook group. And they're both like relatively quiet. The Canadians one seemed like a lot of retirees. The Young Expats was like occasionally people selling stuff, but not a lot going on. And kind of over the past 3 years, especially Panama did a really hardcore lockdown. Once they got off of that, a lot of people started moving there because of the ability to work from anywhere and other stuff that was going on in other countries. I think a lot of people were looking for like, hey, where could be a new base for me? And so both of those groups are really buzzing, like young families, young people, digital nomads. Seems like a lot of people have chosen to move to Panama City and Panama in general. And I think you kind of feel it when you're there. Like it seems like it's really busy. Like there's a lot going on.
Yeah, for sure. I think to be quite honest, I sort of feel like if I had been sleeping the last 3 years and I had no idea of like what had gone on during the pandemic, I wouldn't know that anything had happened. Like it kind of felt pretty much like the exact same as it did when we left or kind of before when we were living there. And I know just from having, a brief coffee with David from the language school, he said, business is good. And there were some scary moments at the beginning of the pandemic when they were forced to close and stuff, but things have been really good. And I feel like we could see it, like the restaurants we were going to felt busy in general, lots of expats, lots of cruise ships coming through. You could see like the people who come off the cruise ships, especially in Casco Viejo, always have these like little stickers on them. So it shows like what group they're a part of, which must be whatever like boat took them over from the cruise ship. And so lots of different groups, lots of people doing tours, that type of thing. So it felt like there was lots of people around. There in the Airbnb we were staying at, there was like a an adjacent one. So there was like 2 units and there was people in that unit. We went for lunch at the new Sofitel, which was really close to our Airbnb, and that seemed really busy and stuff like that. So it seems like things are going well. And for a country that had such an extreme lockdown and just such extreme rules over the last couple of years, you really don't see much of that lingering anymore. I think just being in Mexico, you still do see people wearing masks occasionally and some bits of the pandemic kind of lingering. And I really didn't feel that at all in Panama. I felt like it was just kind of business as usual, which was really great, really refreshing. And I was really happy to see that things were, seemed to be booming.
Yeah. And I think the only thing we kind of felt a bit sad about was a couple places that we really liked having closed down. I kind of feel like this is the case, if you go back to places after 3 years. In general, I know you kind of experience that even like with Mexico City, sometimes going back there. And I know we had a couple of restaurants we'd recommended in the past that aren't open there. But especially with the pandemic, that was obviously very hard. The rules that were imposed made it very hard for a lot of businesses to stay open in a lot of places. And so I think you see that there as well.
Yeah, definitely. There was, I think, one kind of little chocolate shop that we really liked that permanently closed. And then this like amazing gluten-free pizza restaurant that we loved. We ordered from them all the time when we lived there. We were super, super excited to go back. And unfortunately, they closed like 3 weeks or 2 weeks or something before we got to Panama. So that was a bit disappointing. But I mean, it's just hard to know because restaurants do turn over, obviously costs are rising. Who knows? Maybe rents went up too much, but obviously the pandemic probably plays a part just because of the rules and stuff like that, which is unfortunate. But I think overall, we were really pleased to be able to return to a lot of the places that we really liked. And it was just like good vibes overall.
All right. And then the last thing we wanted to cover this episode was just a little bit of background on what this trip was like. It's not our first trip, but it was one of our first kind of just travel focused trips. We'd been to Mexico City, obviously. We'd been back to Canada, spent some time in the States. This was kind of our first hey, go somewhere. We're just, purely traveling. What was the kind of experience like? What were your learnings and takeaways of it?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it was really positive overall. Lou has been on a number of flights at this point, but the flight from Mexico City to Panama was one of the longer ones that we've been on. It's only, I think, about 4.5 hours. So it's not terribly long, but we've kind of done shorter trips with layovers. And, as she's just getting bigger and more active, it just requires a little bit more planning. Like she's just not the little baby that she was when we first traveled with her, where, I can just nurse her and she goes to sleep and she just sleeps most of the plane ride. She's definitely a bit bigger, busier. She needs more things to kind of keep her, attention and stuff like that. But she was great. She flew super well. She was really engaged with looking out the window and, waving at everything and looking at the sky and stuff. So she did really good on the plane. But I feel like that's just something that makes travel a little bit different. Travel is not, travel can always be stressful, but I feel like once you're, through security and you can go to a lounge or you can go to a restaurant, it's you just chill. And then you get on the plane, you put your headphones in, you just chill, you watch a movie. That's not really the case with a baby. So it's just a little bit more planning and being on and stuff like that. But she did really good. I think the other thing that would be kind of the main learning or main difference was just that because she's taking 2 naps a day right now, and she's at an age where she will nap a little bit on the go if she's really tired, but she naps best if we're kind of at home. And obviously it's best for us if she's not overtired, because then she's happier and she's more go with the flow and just, she's enjoying things, we're enjoying things, is that we just can't plan as much. And she gets up pretty early. So it's she wakes up at, let's say 6:30, she's kind of ready to take her first nap around 9:30. So now instead of being the type of people who go for breakfast at 9:30, we're looking at restaurants that are open at 8, and we're the first customers that are there because we want to have breakfast before our daughter needs to nap. And then, we've got this kind of chunk of time once she wakes up to go do things. And when you need to go out and get lunch, that takes up, a good half of her wake window. And then she takes an afternoon nap, and we wanted her to get a good one so we could like go out for dinner, push her bedtime back a little bit. So I feel like it was just a little bit of, like you kind of mentioned before, there was things we wanted to do, like go over to our old neighborhood, walk in the park. You said, had it just been us, we probably would have gone up Ancon Hill and maybe the Causeway. And I think we totally would have, because we would have had a lot more, time. And versus like with her, we're kind of really conscious of, okay, she's got this much time before she's going to get tired again. What can we do in this period of time that's going to be most enjoyable for all of us? Come back, take a nap, relax a little bit. So I would say it's just a little bit more planning and a little bit slower pace of things.
Yeah. And I think for me, kind of echoing that stuff and building off of it would be just the importance of picking like a good location. I think it'll change a little bit as Lou drops one of her naps. But we'd been debating like, we could stay in kind of a hotel on Avenida Balboa. We could stay in an Airbnb in San Francisco. Those would be cool places. Really glad we ended up staying in Casco Viejo because it made it possible for us to just like, walk up the door, 5-minute walk. We're at like a great restaurant, or, we go to a cafe, or we're walking somewhere, versus having to like take different cars, different places. We'd brought her car seat strollers set up, which one of the things we realized was having a better travel strollers is going to be really helpful for us. But it's hard when you're traveling and like needing to take cars, because then you have to have the car seat. But yeah, just like finding the right location, something that's really central to the things you want to do, and just being like, accepting of you can't go as far or do as much, because it's not like when you're just able to jump in an Uber for half an hour, pop out, spend a few hours somewhere, spend 45 minutes in an Uber back, because those 45 minutes might be torture at the end of a long day for a baby. So I think I would say that. One other thing for me was it's really fun to see kind of going from here where our life is like definitely involves less people, like kind of day to day. Lou isn't seeing a ton of people. There's us. Maybe if it's a day where we have some help in the house, or a few neighbor kids, like she doesn't see a ton of people day to day. And so seeing her in like the airport and in these busier areas of cities, she was really seeming to love kind of just waving at people and interacting with different people, which we ended up going from Panama to Colombia, from Colombia to Puerto Vallarta. So we've been doing a ton of travel that we'll update you guys on through the course of a few different episodes. But it's kind of been fun to see her interacting with so many people in so many different ways.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like she's at a really fun age. She was right about 11 months when we went to Panama, and just really aware of the people that are around her, and really engaged with them, and really interested in them, and really getting into waving, like you mentioned. So just waving at everyone. And yeah, I feel like it's just cool to see her interact with the world, and just see her like, this was like a totally new climate for her. I mean, Panama City is like 35 degrees Celsius, basically like all day, every day. And in the evenings, you get some reprieve from the heat, but it's still quite warm. I mean, in the evenings, it was like basically the highs of what we're experiencing in Querétaro right now. And we came from kind of like cold weather here, or cool weather here, to super hot weather there, and just seeing her kind of adapt and change, and sleeping in a new bed and all that type of stuff. She did really great, and she seems to just really enjoy it, and really enjoyed like soaking in the new experiences, new people, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a little more coordination and stuff for us. And I don't mind like the different pace of things. I think it's, totally fine, and it's fun to do and stuff, but there definitely is like, okay, if we're going to go out and we're going to take a walk, and we're going to walk like 45 minutes on the Cinta Costera with Lou strapped to one of us, it kind of means we're committing to, I guess, two different options. One is making sure we walk back because we don't have our car seat, or taking the risk of taking a car without a car seat. And there's many countries in the world where that's not even a possibility. Latin America is very flexible, but that's not something that we're super comfortable with. So it's like, if we do want to go further, we have to plan taking her car seat and in turn her stroller, and then, trying to coordinate like, hey, if we're going to be at a restaurant, we want to go at a time where she's going to be happy and engaged, and not, tired and wanting to sleep and stuff like that. So there is just a little bit of extra coordination that goes into it. I feel like it kind of reminds me a little bit of like going from being just travelers to being nomads. We had to figure out staying in Airbnbs that were a little bit different because we needed spaces for both of us to work, and figuring out how to coordinate our days around having work and stuff like that. I feel like now we're just like adding another level to that, which is a child. So a little bit of extra work, but definitely super fun. I think the one last thing I'll say is that I feel like this trip plus Medellin plus this last one in PV has really showed us that having a space where the bedroom is separate from the living space is really key, because right now she's napping twice a day. Soon it'll only be once a day. But while she's still napping, I feel like it's really nice to have some like separation of space. And then because she goes to bed so early, it's like, we've had places where, we're staying in the same space and we'll just end up going to bed. We'll push her bedtime a little bit later, and then we'll just go to bed like super early because we can't really like talk and hang out when she's sleeping because it'll wake her up. So I feel like that was another learning for me.
Yeah. And then the last kind of note for me is on the way back, we did a layover, but just a couple hours, and then continued on the way. But you really could feel it. Like on the way down, it was like nice to just do one flight. It was, I think it's like 3.5 Mexico, Panama, and then like 45 minutes from Panama to Medellin. 4.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit longer going down, maybe 4.5, and then an hour 25.
So it kind of, it'll be interesting. We have a direct flight to a city on the other side of an ocean coming up in a couple months. So that will be interesting to see how it all goes. But a fun test for that. Overall, though, really great time. Definitely recommend doing a stopover in Panama if it's in the cards for you. From Panama, we made our way to Medellin, Colombia, and we spent 3 weeks there. So in an upcoming episode, we'll talk about that trip, all the stuff we did. This was our first time in Colombia, kind of as nomads doing work and travel. So we'll talk about that, what we liked, what we didn't like. And anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I just want to say thanks for listening. And if you guys get to Panama, definitely let us know what you think. Hopefully this is helpful. And I think we're both already itching to get back. So hopefully we can get another trip on the books soon and spend a little longer in Panama City.
Until next time.
Okay, bye guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast, and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.